Hi, we are in week 4 of our course right now, and I looked over the quiz, and I thought the most difficult thing on the quiz had to do with radicals. There were many other things that you will have to do on the quiz, including working with decimals and doing rounding, but I thought the radical piece was the most difficult. So I've chosen to look at a couple of problems where you will be simplifying square roots. What you see on the screen is called the square root symbol, and this will indicate that we are trying to find one of the numbers two equal factors. So the first thing we will look at is something called a perfect square. The first perfect square is 1, and that is because 1 times 1 is 1. If we continue in that process, 2 times 2 is going to give me a 4, 3 times 3 will give me a 9, 4 times 4 is a 16, 5 times 5 is a 25. Continuing with this method, we can keep multiplying numbers by themselves to get all these different perfect squares. These are the ones that are the most important because these are the ones that you may see when you're asked to simplify different expressions. So the first section that I have is if we are trying to take the square root of something that is one of the perfect squares. So I have a few problems here, and I would like to try to simplify these. So again, the square root symbol there means that I'm looking for one of the numbers two equal factors, and it always implies that the answer will be positive. So when I'm looking for the square root of 4, I'm looking for a number that when I multiply it by itself, I will get 4. So the answer for the first one is going to be 2 because 2 times 2 is 4. I did want to point out that negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4, but when you see the square root symbol, you are automatically bound to just use the positive value of the number. The next one, again, I'm looking for two equal numbers that give you 16, and that will be a 4. On this number, I wanted you to be careful because if you take the square root of 16, you get a 4. You do not square root this to death. Even though 4 is another perfect square, once you take the square root the first time, you will be done with the problem. You only take the square root one time. Also notice when you take the square root, you will take the symbol away. The next one we have, again, what number times itself will equal 25? That answer is 5. For the next one, we're looking for two equal factors that give you 100, and that is 10. And then the last one, what two equal factors of 144 can we find? And that one is a 12. So if it is a perfect square from the list that I mentioned on the previous page, then you just find the number and take the square root symbol away. All right, now we get to some that are a little bit more difficult. The numbers that I have on the next slide are not perfect squares. Okay, what we will do with these, though, is we will try to find a perfect square that is a factor of the numbers under this square root symbol. By the way, the number under the square root symbol we call a radicand. So for the first one, we're looking for a perfect square that goes into the number 8. To do this, you look back to the sheet that had the perfect squares and find a perfect square that goes in. If 2 do go in, always take the larger of the 2. So for this one, I have the square root of 8. I'm looking for the perfect square, and the answer to that is a 4. So I will break this 8 down into a product of 4 times 2. The perfect square should go first. The other factor will go second. Okay, and then the last step is to take the square root of the perfect square. So the 4 is going to come out of the square root symbol, and I'm going to take the square root of that, and the answer to that will then be just 2 square root of 2. So the 4 that was in the radical sign is now come out of the radical sign as a 2. The other factor of a 2 will stay under the radical sign. So only the perfect square will come out. All right, to do the next one, I will now look for the number 20. What two numbers can make 20, one of which is a perfect square? And again, this one is also going to be a 4. This time it is 4 times 5. And again, the square root of the first factor will come out of the radical sign. So the square root of the 4 is going to be a 2. And again, the 5 being not a perfect square will stay under the radical sign. The next one is the square root of 32. Now for 32, there is actually two choices. We could either use 4 again, 4 times 8, But 16 will also be a perfect square that goes in there. So we will want to take the square root of 16 as our radical that we will use. So the factors I will use this time are 16 times 2. Again, 16 is the perfect square, so you will take that out of the square root sign, and it will become a 4 in front. 2, the non-perfect square, will stay in the radical sign. Okay, I've got a couple more. Square root of 75. We're looking for this time a perfect square that goes into 75. Again, if you look at your list, 25 will be a perfect square that goes into the 75. And that, again, goes into the first position. The second position is the non-perfect square. And then when I simplify it, the 5 will come out of the radical sign because the square root of 25 is 5. For the last one, we have 40. Again, we look for a perfect square, and unfortunately, we have to go back to our favorite one, 4. So 4 times 10, again, is the product of 40, 4 being the perfect square. And after you take the square root of 4, you will end up with a 2 square root of 2. Hopefully, these will be sufficient for you to be able to simplify any of the radicals that are in the quiz and also in the activities for week 4.